Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. We are thrilled that you're here with us today. We have a very special guest. We have Kate Walsh. She is the president of National Council on Teacher Quality. She caught Melissa's attention first, and then Melissa shared her article with me. But Melissa, I want you to share why you were so excited to send the article to me, and one of the reasons why you were like, we have to have Kate on our podcast.
Yeah, so Kate's short article was called Getting at the Root of the School to Prison Pipeline, which doesn't sound like it might be about literacy, but I think that's what made it so powerful to me, is talking about, not just what's wrong with literacy instruction, but what happens to students if they are not getting the literacy instruction that they should be getting. And I won't feel it too much because that's what Kate's going to talk about today.
So we have Kate with us. Kate, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So Kate, we wanted you to just do a brief bio, but I do want to point out we have a lot of Baltimore listeners, and I believe you reside in Baltimore, yes?
I do. I still live in Baltimore, though our office is located in D.C., but I do the commute every now and then. And so I'm a pretty much a lifer at this point in Baltimore. I've been here about 35, 38 years. So.
Oh, wow.
We're right here with you.
I grew up in Indiana.
Awesome.
There you go. You moved on out east, right?
Yeah. There was this man involved.
That seems to be the case. So, Kate, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your career and how you made it to be the president for National Council on Teacher Quality. We'd love to hear.
I actually got into this world because it was my parents' and grandparents' world. I come from generations of teachers, and my mother actually started a school out in South Bend, Indiana, because she was dissatisfied with the instruction that her kids were getting. There were 7 girls in our family, and my oldest sisters were not getting what she thought was a good quality education. So she just did what any normal person would do and started her own school. And just education was always so important. But what my mother really drilled into us was the importance of standards. And she's now gone, but there isn't a day that goes by where I'm not grateful to her for setting those lessons out for us on standards.
Can you tell us more about what standards they are?
Well, she certainly was in regards to literacy. She loved books and loved high quality literature, and she also believed very much in phonics. And that was when phonics was actually taught in schools. It was before we had ever heard of such a thing as phonemic awareness. But, my mother believed so strongly in we weren't even allowed to read Nancy Drew. We were only allowed to read very highbrow children's literature, but it was all excellent. And, it's funny. I mean, a lot of people would laugh at my mom for being such a snob, but I grew up with a love for just some many, many wonderful books that I treasure to this day. And I'm always a little sad when I run into people who can't name a book that they remember from being a child. So she taught me a great love of literature, but she also recognized the importance of phonics in her school. We all got it. And that was before phonemic awareness was a thing, but we did get those basics. Anyway, my mother imparted in me a deep, deep commitment to education. And whereas she poured all her energies into a school where her basically fairly well privileged children, certainly not wealthy, but privileged compared to a lot of kids, could thrive. I wanted to pour my energies into helping kids who are growing up in poverty get a similar love for education and for books and reading. And so that's been my sort of driving force behind my own commitment to education.
Excellent. And can you describe the mission of the National Council on Teacher Quality and the work you do there?
Yeah. So it's funny. People sometimes get a little confused about what we do. I am not a teacher. I'm a policy person, very much dependent on being surrounded by people who have been teachers to keep me real. We're not as much a teacher organization as we are very much of the belief that institutions control the lives of teachers, and institutions like states and teacher preparation programs in colleges and universities, as well as school districts, have sometimes a very harmful impact on teachers, and sometimes they have a good impact, but they are why we might not get as many high quality individuals who enter the profession as we would like. They are why really great teachers sometimes leave the room. Policy matters. And so we work very, very hard to persuade policymakers to do right by the teaching profession.
That sounds very exciting. When you're doing this, what do you persuade them to do? Like, what kinds of topics would you be talking about in order to persuade them to make decisions that support teachers in this profession?
So what we're best known for is that, I need to tell you a little story.
Yes. We love stories.
Yeah. So back in 1910, there was a guy named Abraham Flexner who was a school headmaster. And he was charged by the Carnegie Foundation to go out and rate the nation's medical schools. And why would they do that? It's because medical training in the United States was deplorable. I mean, you could get into medical school without a high school degree. You never operated on a body, live or dead. All you did was learn medicine by studying some textbooks. And it was in contrast to what they were doing in Europe, which was much more clinical. And so Carnegie asked Abraham Flexner to go around and assess the quality of medical training in the United States. And there were 155. So he visited every one of them over a period of 3 years. And he found only one worth its salt. But in the period shortly after that report being issued, you saw a dramatic transformation occurring in medical schools. So it's probably the most famous report of the last century social sciences, and every doctor's heard of it. And so a lot of people over the years have said, look, the way we prepare teachers in the United States is really mediocre, if not worse. And but how could we do something like Flexner did with medical schools when there are there's 1,450 institutions in the United States that train teachers, and they have a graduate level program, an undergraduate level program. There's actually 27,000 teacher preparation programs in the United States of one kind or another.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
So it's really hard to figure out how to do that, and you couldn't have done. So we did it. We don't do 27,000 programs. But we do we do most of the programs in the United States that prepare elementary and secondary teachers. And the most important thing we look at is the quality of their reading preparation of elementary teachers. Do they teach them how to teach reading using scientifically based evidence? And we've been doing this work since 2006, when we found in a sample of programs that there were only 17% that did it. And then we have keep tracking that, and we went national in 2013. And we're about to come out with new ratings at the end of January, which repeat the trend that we've been seeing of increased compliance with the science of reading. So there are at least more and more programs are acknowledging that there is such a thing as reading science. But I can't say yet, and certainly not on this podcast, whether we've passed the 50% mark. So it's kind of remarkable, given that this science has really been settled for 3 decades. And, but be that as it may, we are determined to keep measuring and holding programs' feet to the fire on this. So how they prepare teachers to teach reading, I have seen teachers reduced to tears, and I'm sure you have as well, who finally learn, maybe after being in the classroom 10 or 15 years, what it is they were supposed to have been doing for the last all their years. And they said they feel so guilty. They feel so guilty for all those kids that went through their class, and nobody told them ever how to teach reading. And so this is not on teachers at all. We do this on behalf of teachers, this work.
Yep.
Yeah, Kate, what are you looking for in those programs? Like, what elements need to be in them to say that they've met the mark?
Yeah.
Well, what we do is we collect the course materials. We read every single textbook that is read in a class. So we have experts evaluate them on their adherence to the 5 pillars of scientifically based reading research. So you're looking you're not just looking for some readings on phonemic awareness. We want to make sure that there's some assignments given to the teacher where they'll have to demonstrate their understanding of phonemic awareness. We want to make sure there's, some tests or quizzes on the science. We want to make sure that there's lectures or class time dedicated to the science of reading. So it's a complicated process, but it's one that very well aligns with, it correlates with studies where they've actually sat in on classes. If anything, we give schools the benefit of the doubt. From when you were a kid or a college student, when you had a syllabus, you never covered the whole thing. But so if anything, we give more credit to programs than we should. And a lot of reading experts have told us we really need to amp up the difficulty of our standard, that the bar is too low. And we're going to be looking at that issue in the next year. We're going to be assembling some folks to help us look at it again to make sure it's reflective of the most recent research, and that the bar is set at an appropriate place where teachers can confidently know that they will leave that program knowing how to teach kids to read. But then they've got this other problem, and that's the curriculum that the school district hands them. But conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about the components of reading before, the pillars of reading. I know you named a couple, but I just want to name them all for our listeners. I feel like the more you name them, the better we all know them. But phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And it sounds like the work that you're doing is falling in the first several categories.
Actually, all 5.
You'll land in all. Okay.
Yeah, we look for all 5. First we want to make sure kids it's what's we've learned more and more is how important phonemic awareness is. And if your readers don't know what that is do kids properly hear the sounds that we make? When we speak the written word, do we hear when we hear the word, when we hear the, do we hear the, or are we hearing buh? That's a necessary skill before we get to phonics. And then every kid needs to be able to read fluently without having to think about it, or else they can't think about the meaning of the text. They can't be sitting there going, how do I sound out this word? Have to be able to do it fluently. And then vocabulary and comprehension, I think comprehension is probably the most poorly taught skill of all, because it's not a skill. But so anyway, that is it's all. But none of that. One of the things that we haven't gotten into is oral language as much as we should, because I don't think teachers understand the importance of reading out loud to their kids. They think it's a fun activity. They don't know that that's an opportunity for kids to learn new words that they wouldn't be able to learn if they were trying to read it themselves.
Yeah, I saw this beautiful graphic once and I wish I could find it. It was in like a PowerPoint presentation, and I would have to dig it out like 3 old laptops ago. But I can picture it in my head, and it's this beautiful arc, and it describes where oral comprehension meets silent reading comprehension. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was at about 6th grade is where that levels out and meets.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah, and just the benefit of that, and it's not just reading for fun, but reading out loud for a purpose. That oral comprehension is very important all the way up through 6th grade, and really important too if you have students who are older and who are struggling readers. It's a very helpful tool.
Yeah, don't you think a lot of teachers give up on it as soon as their kids know how to read? They don't realize that, first of all, we all love stories, but in addition to just the love of it, it's how you build vocabulary most effectively.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we talk a lot about knowledge building on our podcast, and absolutely, we agree with you that comprehension is not an isolated skill by any means. Yeah.
Well, if you haven't had Natalie Wexler on your show talking about the knowledge gap and how you really build comprehension, you should do that. She's she's a journalist who's written a book on this.
Yeah,
we are super fans, Kate.
She's great.
We are, and to push it even further, we are having Emily Hanford on our podcast. To really extend the conversation about what you're speaking of. So we're excited to bring light to the science of reading in lots of different ways through this podcast. Yeah. So I want to talk about a quote, if it's okay, that you shared, or that was in your article. I'm trying to find it because let's see. You know what? Not the quote, the NAEP report, the NAEP results, because I want to just bring it to light for our listeners. It says the NAEP results show that Black and Hispanic students are more likely to struggle with reading. The percent of 8th grade students scoring below basic by race and ethnicity as of 2019, Black students scored 47% below basic, and Hispanic students scored 38% below basic, while white students scored 19% below basic. Do you want to share your reactions to that? Because I think that I really thought what you said in the article was very important.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, I've been looking at similar numbers. I'm sort of at the twilight of my professional career, and I've been looking at those same kinds of numbers for decades, and always have been upset by them, and it's what drives me to seek to improve educational systems. But it wasn't until I was given the opportunity, along with the rest of my staff and board, to go to Montgomery, Alabama, to go to the Legacy Museum. And if any of your listeners or if you haven't gone, I almost think it should be a mandatory field trip for every American. There's a lot of Americans in the Trump administration I'd like to take right now. What they've done down there, it's not a traditional museum, but it walks you through in a way that has a quiet but horrifying power. How we as a nation have not really cast off the mantle of deep, deep institutional racism. And you start with slavery, and it's probably, I'd say slavery in some ways was the least powerful story it told because it's a story that we know the best. And it's a story that we're the most comfortable telling and talking about and doing movies about because it's in the past. And of course, we don't believe in slavery anymore. And so we haven't had slavery since 1864. And geez, weren't we horrible human beings to have ever thought that that was okay to do? And so some of the stories that the museum tells you is, they're horrible, horrible, horrible what was perpetuated on Africans, but and their descendants. But then the museum, what it does is it links slavery to the Jim Crow era. And I was not, I went to this museum thinking I'm a very enlightened person. I've dedicated my life to helping kids who are predominantly minority. And what did I need educating for? And I'll just go and it'll be a moving experience, but I won't learn anything. Well, boy, was I wrong. And you go through the Jim Crow era, which I didn't realize was a response to the end of slavery. So it was just another way that we were able to suppress Black people. And the lynchings that occurred over a period of 7 decades were simply another manifestation of keeping Black men, women, and children. Children were lynched as well for doing absolutely nothing. So there's a tribute to them in another place in Montgomery that I can't remember the formal name of it, but it's devastating. And so you didn't realize how institutional the Jim Crow era was, nor did you realize, or I didn't, how long it was. And then when the rise of the civil rights movement really put a stop to lynchings, much to the anger of a lot of folks, we instead found ways to deal with Black and ultimately brown people as well by just putting them in jail. And so you go from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration. And the museum has, it has some reference to education. It does. But it's more about the fact that we segregated. They're in, I think there was even a quote up there from Alabama where they still have in their constitution there that schools have the right to be segregated. So it's pretty remarkable. But what was absent, and that's what I wrote about, what was absent in my view was that we continue not to teach Black and brown kids how to read. And that if the NAEP results had looked a little bit differently, if the NAEP results or on all the other different assessments we look at every few years and throw up our hands and say, isn't this terrible? If that were about white kids, schools would have changed what they did a long time ago. And schools wouldn't have tolerated having teachers coming out of teacher preparation programs who had been deprived of the tools they need to teach all kids. So I put this theory on the table I'm not positive I'm right, but the more I talk about it, the more it feels right, because I can't come up with another explanation for how we as a society are willing to tolerate half of Black and brown kids not reading.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I don't know. I haven't had anybody actually push back on that. But, maybe they do behind my back. But it doesn't make sense to me. Why would a school district reject what we know is scientifically? I mean, I think about when new technologies come around or new ways of doing things. It's always hard for people to adapt. It's always hard for people to change. But we're sort of past that point here, and it's still a struggle to get school districts to recognize that they need to give teachers the data tools. Teachers are given data tools that tell them that they're being successful with teaching their kids to read, using these Fontes and Pinnell things, where, they all hear that they're 80% successful. So they think they did a great job. So the kid goes on to the next grade and, it's remarkable.
It's a cycle. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And instead of, sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
I was just going to say, I did want to pull a quote from the article just to underscore what you were saying. The question that you asked was, is the reason Americans tolerate unnecessarily high rates of kids who never learn how to read yet another manifestation of institutionalized racism? And it captures everything you just said, but I just think it's super powerful.
Yeah. I'm left with no other recourse at this point. I can't come up with another reason why this persists when we could I don't think what teachers realize is they should be able to teach 90 to 95% of the kids in their class how to read, no matter what school they're in, no matter where they are, that it's a very small number of seriously, brain confused kids that can't learn how to read if these methods are taught.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so thinking about those systematic foundational skills that we know all kids benefit from, research has shown us that. I wonder why, to piggyback on what you said, not only do districts and schools not have some sort of curriculum to address this that is high quality foundational skills programming, but why, when they do, that it doesn't get taught. I think that it's really important that if you have curriculum that you use it. And that, so I wonder that, and I don't know that that's a question we can answer today, but, or why it doesn't get taught as intended, I guess I should say.
Oh, I know why.
Yeah. Okay, go for it.
No, it's because the teacher doesn't understand the foundational, hasn't been given the foundational knowledge that allows them to know how to teach it. So, a doctor can have, the best surgical tools in the world. But if he doesn't understand why you use something here and not there and how you use it, you can't make educated decisions. And as teachers that you have to make snap decisions, boom, 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 boom. You don't have time to sit there and, reflect on which one might work. And so if you don't have that foundational knowledge that you should have gotten in your pre-service education, you're going to make mistakes through no fault of your own. So I've heard people who have put in Wit and Wisdom, which is a fabulous new reading curriculum. And
that's what we have in Baltimore.
Oh, okay. And they've messed it up. They're not teaching with fidelity. Well, why is that? Because they don't understand the principles and the theories that undergird that curriculum. So they're going to skip something they should never have skipped. They're going to change something they should have never have changed. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean, if you're going to treat someone as a professional, they have to have the professional knowledge on which to make judgments. It can't be a guessing game. It can't be what they feel like doing at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to two things, because I think what your work is really important in getting at the root of the issue, like almost while teachers are at that pre-service level. But I'm thinking of it like a 2-lane road where we have a ton of teachers, and probably the majority of teachers teaching right now. So there needs to be some in-service,
yes,
obviously that happens. And in terms of professional development, in terms of research, and I know in the Wit and Wisdom PDs, Melissa and I have both been in them, and they use a lot of research to support that and to, treat teachers like trusted colleagues, so that they are gaining that knowledge, and bit by bit in that knowledge gain, then they're understanding the design and the whys behind it as adult learners.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, until you have to practice what you learn, we know cognitively it's very hard for us to absorb it and own it.
Mm-hmm.
In law, that you go to law school, then you have to practice law, and you're like, is there any connection between what you practice and what you learn? There is, but I think that you are only putting in some building blocks in the course of your professional education. And those foundational building blocks are necessary, but they're never going to replace that sort of day-to-day wrestling. Here I am trying to put in this new curriculum that my school has handed me. Now, what do I need to do? I mean, there's no compete. So you absolutely have to have good PD.
Yes.
Which schools districts we know are really good at giving great PD, right?
Yes. We on our podcast, we believe that it should be curriculum focused and by the experts.
Yes, absolutely.
Melissa and I always like to joke around about the PDs that we were in, well before, when we were teachers, and learning about a pedagogy, and it's just really hard to apply if you don't have a curriculum to apply it to. And when you have a curriculum, the pedagogy is embedded within, so your PD really becomes that much richer. Especially when it's delivered by an expert in it.
Yeah, and if you look at, district PD, even even if it's an amazing actual professional development session, we're talking about 4 to 5 days per year that teachers would get that, versus talking about their teacher preparation 4+ years of preparing. So yeah, there's a big gap between what you can really do in that PD time.
There's not been a whole lot of studies that have found any PD to work. But the studies that I have come across that have shown PD to actually produce learning gains in kids are curriculum-based, where teachers are wrestling with specific concrete problems within the curriculum that they're teaching and how kids are responding to it, and teachers working with other teachers. That, but you can't just be a sit and bitch session where you're just talking, whining about kids. You've got to have something constructive to talk about.
Yeah, we agree with that. And I want to circle back to something in the very beginning, in terms of that teacher training, and how we were discussing that you had mentioned that teachers felt so badly when they realized that they weren't doing what they needed to do at some point in their career. They didn't know the science of reading, and they had just learned it. Melissa and I read David Lieben's Know Better, Do Better. And so we try to use that in our practice. I taught second grade and back in the day, and I had used the 3 cueing system because I didn't know any better. And I felt badly, but then I learned and I did better. So, I think at one point we're teaching the folks in college, those pre-service teachers, the right way, to the best that we can at this point, and we're hoping that it catches on, and your work is really important in that. But those in the field can use that to make themselves know that once they learn it, it's important that they do it and do better. It's a hard pill to swallow, I think, to be a teacher and to learn it later in your career.
Oh, it's just tragic.
Yeah.
I mean, a teacher, no one is more acutely aware than a teacher that their kids only get one chance at that grade. That they can say, I'll do better next year. I mean, this happens with first year teachers all the time. They feel terrible about their first year of teaching. And what I have struggled with more than anything is that we have a lot of knowledge that ought to be part of teacher prep. And it's not just about reading, it's about math, it's about classroom management, it's about what you need to do to improve student learning. It's about the kind of what makes a good student teaching experience. We have all that knowledge. And why anyone thinks that it shouldn't be fundamental to every single teacher prep program in the country is something I can't quite get my hands around. But there's a real ideological resistance on the part of many teacher prep programs that says we don't train teachers, we create teachers, we mold them, we shape them. So we've looked at thousands and thousands of reading courses, and what the most popular way of teaching, of preparing teachers to teach reading is to have them develop their own philosophy. Because the reason they do that is they think every child is unique and every classroom is unique. And if they teach you a single approach, that will cause you to be prejudicial and not take into consideration the uniqueness of each class. Which is, if we applied that same thinking to medicine or any other profession, like a hairdresser even, everyone has different hair. But I guarantee you, hairdressers learn how to work on different kinds of hair. But there is a certain, all involve scissors.
Right.
all involve how to use scissors. So, yes, we're unique, but there are some common rules.
Right.
And the other thing, and you can stop me if I'm rattling on too much, is I just don't understand the idea there is no one way to teach reading. We do know there is one way, only one way, that gets us to 95% of all kids reading. That 40% of kids will learn that way, or they'll learn any way you put in front of them. Right. It doesn't matter, but they're not hurt by the fact that the school is only teaching one way. They're not bored. That's not a problem. It's not, it's not doing them an injustice. So if you're not going to hurt those kids and they will learn how to read themselves, why not teach one way to all kids?
Yep. Kate, do you have any insight into why teacher prep programs stick with that ideology? And
and boy, have I learned this the hard way. They are what we make the mistake. Those of us who spend all our time in K-12, we don't appreciate how you advance in higher ed. So in higher ed, you get promoted, you get recognized for thinking great new ideas. So they really push back if they're seen as trainers. Like they'll say, you train dogs, you don't train teachers. And I'll say, well, you train doctors,
Yeah.
we use the word doctor.
I prefer a doctor not be creative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a real, but they say that because, and I'm speaking general terms. I mean, you'd have to have them on to defend themselves, but but they say that because they want to be seen. Teacher educators have always been sort of the stepchildren, to use an old-fashioned term, stepchildren of academia. They've always struggled to achieve parity with their peers in the College of Liberal Arts. They've always felt insecure. And there's good reason for that, because liberal arts has always held their nose, just always looked down on teacher educators. They don't think that they teach anything real. They think they're sort of making it up. Well, what's tragic about this, if teacher educators would start to teach this whole body of science I alluded to a few minutes ago in classroom management. I mean, there's very firm theory and practice in learning sciences, very firm. If they would do all these things, I think that they would raise their status with their peers in the College of Arts and Sciences, because they would be teaching very real evidence-based work. But instead, the prevailing wisdom in many ed schools is I get to teach what I believe, and it's called academic freedom. I'd argue it's academic freedom abused. It's not how academic freedom is supposed to work.
Yeah. Kate, I'm going to interject a story that really supports what you just said. So I had been working in a school, and the school partnered with a local university to have interns, student teacher interns. And I was observing a student teacher teaching a lesson, and the school the district had adopted a high quality curriculum. And so the teacher was like kind of doing what I would refer to as cherry picking, choosing some parts of the lesson to use, not using others, using the lesson text, but not using it in the way that it was intended in the lesson. And then the students were asked to do a task, and the teacher had rewritten the task. And so it was a grade 6 classroom. And when the teacher rewrote the task, it was, if I wanted to align a standard to it, it was basically meeting like a 3rd grade standard. And so in the debrief, I was asking questions. I'm like, what happened? Why did you make the decisions that you made? Can you tell me about it? And the teacher shared that in the teacher prep program that she was in, she had been asked to create a 2-week unit plan, which meant completely overhauling the curriculum and rewriting it. And so one of the things that I've talked about before, and Melissa's talked about before on this podcast, is teachers really shifting that mindset from being creators to being implementers. And that's a really difficult mindset shift. But if we could get, universities and colleges and the prep programs to embrace that, how much easier it would be to do so, and help shift that narrative to, we are implementing high quality curriculum, and how we can take that and really customize for our students as we get really good at teaching.
Right. It's what you do with first year teachers, for sure. You say, a first year teacher should never feel comfortable deviating. But as you grow in professional wisdom, you're going to know what you can alter. But imagine how much easier life would be as a first year teacher is if you didn't feel like every day you were coming in and writing, Romeo and Juliet, or creating the next great work of art. I mean, you just, it's why first year teachers go home and throw up every night and have migraines and headache. I mean, we're asked way too much of them.
I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah, Melissa and I have talked about it a lot. Melissa, you did that your first couple years, sure. Yes? You told the story about workbooks.
I had nothing my first couple of years, so I was creating everything from scratch, and it probably was not great.
No, and you
It was
probably
definitely not.
I don't know. Were you looking at? I mean, teachers' primary source of curriculum is Pinterest, which is hardly,
That didn't even exist then.
Yes.
I didn't even have
Hey,
that.
we are older than we sound. Teachers pay teachers, and Pinterest were not even a blip on the radar.
But this is not a criticism of teachers. These are teachers who are casting about trying to find something that they can do in their next day's lesson, because school districts have let them down.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Kate, you've given us a lot to think about today. Would you wrap us up with a piece of advice that you would give to, I guess, maybe teachers or maybe some teacher prep programs? I don't know. Whoever you feel like you might have some advice for.
Yeah, I think it's my advice would be probably to teachers that that you can get better, and there are now ways to get better. Some school districts are doing what's called letters training, LETRS.
Yep.
There's also an online thing that a letters trainer designed called Top 10 reading teacher, Top 10 something about reading. I can't even think of it.
We'll have to find that.
And that was developed by a woman named Deb Glazer, who is actually, she reviews the lion's share of our textbooks that we review when we're looking at a reading course. And she's amazing. And, you can learn this online. Which is not going to, solve all your problems, but there is enough out there. And to, I was just reading in a newspaper story this morning how, one of the biggest reading science deniers, which I like to call them, was, thought that there was a bill on dyslexia introduced into the Tennessee legislature, and he said, those people should be shot. And I'm thinking, really, this is Richard Allington, who's probably the foremost advocate of what is called whole language. But balanced literacy and whole language are not really approaches to teaching anything. There's no real science behind them. They're simply a belief, but they're not really a reading approach. If you find yourself covering words up in your classroom so that kids can guess what the words are by clues you've given them, you are definitely being given the wrong materials. And so you need to start raising questions, both for your own professional knowledge, but also you need to raise questions with your school and school district. And that's not always easy for teachers. It's hard to go up against the man, but it's the only way we're going to get out of this mess. And I do think, let me bring me back to the central point. I do think if we raise the truth of what's behind this, that we are being unfair to kids who are Black and brown, who are more likely, and the only reason Black and brown kids aren't learning how to read is they're more likely to grow up in poverty. And they're more likely not to have had those books in their homes. So it's not something ingrained in being Black or brown. It's simply that they're more likely to be poor. So, but I do think if we call school districts on this and say, if I don't learn the right way to teach reading, I am contributing to a decades, centuries pattern in the United States of institutionalized racism, and I'm not going to be a part of that.
Yeah. That is an interesting way to think of it, and I think a way that will impact many of our listeners. So thank you for that really very important advice.
Great. Well, it's my pleasure to be with you guys today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've loved listening and learning with you, so thank you.